Think about this. When a company consistently ranks as one of the world's best places to work and helps transform the world's largest organizations, well, people notice. In fact, one of the most common questions WWT's leadership team gets is simply, how? A big part of that answer lies in culture, and in today's rapidly changing workplace with AI reshaping how we work, talent going remote, and organizations trying to scale faster than ever, culture isn't just about values on a wall, it's about measurable business impact. And that's exactly what we're diving into with WWT's Digital Workspace Priorities for 2025. Priority 5 reveals a practical framework for turning culture into competitive advantage. You'll see how new technologies are revolutionizing cultural measurement, how strong cultures navigate major change, and most importantly, how getting culture right drives exceptional business results. Well, what makes today's conversation unique? You're about to see WWT's principles of trust and transparency in action as two leaders share their playbook openly. Joe Berger heads WWT's digital experience practice, where he spent over a decade helping organizations transform their workplace culture into measurable business success. His journey from the early days of conferencing technology to today's AI-driven solutions gives him unique insight into what really drives change. And then there's Krista Bush, who brings an invaluable perspective as VP of Global Employee Experience. Her 24-year journey from finance intern to executive leadership at WWT means that she's not just theorizing about culture, she's living its evolution and now leads initiatives that directly impact over 10,000 employees globally. I'm Rob Boyd, and on this episode of WWT Presents Research, we're getting an inside look at how culture becomes your secret weapon, complete with a 5-step framework that you can put into action today. So let's get to it. How does company culture affect kind of workspace initiatives? Because I assume you've seen examples through various customers where they've got a culture to play off of versus maybe some that are struggling to really continue to adapt their culture in the right direction. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, if you look at how Worldwide kind of looks at culture, it's really the foundation of everything that we do. And that definitely starts at the top. It is a senior level initiative, and it always has been. It's part of our DNA. And so if you look at things within our culture, things like trust, embracing change, being a great place to work, as those things start kind of trickling down, you say, well, how does technology kind of affect that? We do a lot of listening to our employees. So we do virtual town halls. We do a lot of surveys. There's a lot of newer technologies out there like AI that can start doing sentiment analysis scoring. And it's super important that we are looking at that feedback and constantly measuring, okay, where are we at today? What do we need to improve upon to ensure that our employees have this great experience, whether you're at an office, work remote, doing the hybrid thing? We have to keep listening and making sure that their voices are being heard. And our executive team, and I think this is really important, when we talk to clients, the executives have to hear that, and they have to try to figure out how do we measure that and how do we improve upon it. It's one thing just to say, great, we got data, we took a survey, cool. People like it or they don't. So what? What are those improvements we think we need to keep making? How do we keep measuring that and building KPIs behind it to ensure that we are progressing as an organization to hit that cultural significance that the leadership team really desires to be?
It can come across in different ways depending on how it's done, who does it, and kind of what's been the long-term experience. If I've constantly fed back information and felt like I've never been heard, then it's probably falling on deaf ears and you're probably not seeing things developed. Krista, do you see challenges, any specific challenges with regards to kind of linking business results with culture?
When you think about culture and you think about how we measure whether or not it's impactful or it's working, it can be somewhat subjective. I think, though, at Worldwide, as we have kind of created and adopted our own homegrown initiatives around our integrated management and leadership curriculum, if we put up our revenue stream over the history of the organization, it absolutely correlates. It shows that progression forward and that growth of profitability. And we can pinpoint as we've rolled out new concepts or new initiatives within that curriculum and how it absolutely has really connected to our overall success and growth as an organization. I think the one thing, and kind of back to even what Joe said, is that really is imperative that it starts at the top. If we didn't have Jim Kavanaugh, Joe Koenig, Tom Strunk, all heavily focused and working tirelessly with the executive team to buy into what we mean by those concepts in terms of both understanding and application, we wouldn't be where we're at today, because no one really from then on, or, disseminating down, would embrace our culture like we have. So I think at times it can be difficult to correlate those things because culture can be, sticky and subjective. But I think that as you put the same amount of emphasis on culture as you do business, and you're working together in those things and creating high performance teamwork because of those two things, you can absolutely kind of correlate how well your culture is aiding to the success of your overall business.
We actually get into this in the priorities report. There's a stat, 5 times, companies with best in class cultures are 5 times more likely to experience significant revenue increases. So, they have done the research into a lot of organizations that are truly successful, and they've looked at their culture, and those that pay attention to it, put the time and effort into maturing it, growing it, they typically prove out from a revenue perspective that they are more successful than others as well. Especially as you look at some of these younger generations starting to work, enter the workforce, they are evaluating the culture of the organization on top of compensation and where am I going to work and jobs and all that. It matters much more now. I think one thing, I talked a little about COVID earlier. I think one thing that happened during COVID is it exposed gaps in cultures. It became a lot harder to work remotely because you had to have a lot of trust within your team, your teammates, and your company to really be productive and successful in that hybrid model. And it exposed where those organizations maybe didn't have that level of trust, or, they had the old philosophy, if I see you, I know you're working, but if I don't see you, I don't know what you're doing. I think it exposed a lot of those kind of
Line of
narratives
sight
in
management.
companies.
Yeah.
And I think it started showing a lot of holes in culture that people started saying, well, maybe that culture isn't that great. Maybe we can't be successful without some of these basics.
Yeah.
And I think that's why coming out and over the past couple of years, I think people are paying a lot more attention to it. It matters. And to my point earlier, if you can prove it out, if you can do it, you will be more successful as an organization. You're going to move faster. You're going to deal with difficult problems earlier.
Yeah.
It will get you through the hard stuff if you've got that culture in place.
You mentioned a couple of different technologies. Talk about sentiment analysis with AI, and technologies continue to change. And on one hand, I think, of course, they enable us to do a lot of things right and wrong. That was an example of drastic change. And one of the things that gets better if you've got a strong culture is that you can handle change because of a higher trust level. I love that point, because I think those two are inextricably linked. Many companies are kind of making those decisions about, well, do we force a return to work? Do we do something in the middle? Is culture harder to develop and work on if with that not instability is not the right word, but just with people not all being there? Perhaps I feel like it gets easier if we can see each other. It's more difficult perhaps in a more distributed market that we find ourselves in. Krista, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I would say sometimes you have to be more intentional about it. And I think that the more that you're aware of, how you can bring, a sense of collaboration together, how you can ensure that productivity still, is intact. I think as you think about how we engage with our customers and ensuring that we don't see any of those things fall to the wayside, I think that is okay. Like, that's why we are sticking kind of with our remote work policy, our flexible schedule, if you will, is because of those things. We've seen great success even in the years of COVID, but I think we've been very intentional to ensure that we keep the culture, at kind of at firsthand, is that it's something that we don't want to fall to the wayside, that it is our foundation, and we're going to keep investing in ways to ensure that people still feel, that culture, that sense of belonging and being a great place to work for all, regardless if you're sitting in your home or you're sitting in the four walls of a worldwide building. But it takes intentionality to ensure that you keep that intact. So, for us, it's been a benefit to our employees. I think those that can work from home, and for us, we've continued to be successful. So, we're going to, continue to lean into that, but ensure that, we don't lose sight of the culture that we have established, and ensure that it stays and grows continuously.
Anecdotally to that, as you look at this as a competitive advantage. So we do talk to a lot of clients, and some of them are going back to full return to office mandates. Some are going to the 3-day model, and some are kind of just, kind of come and go as you please. Even here, we don't necessarily have a mandate. Now, some teams do just go in because they like going in, but for the most part, there's no mandate. The advantage of this is if you have a strong culture that's built on trust and making relationships, if I know I can go hire the best person for the job, regardless of their location, it's going to make my company more productive and more competitive versus, oh, I can only go hire in this market because I have to ensure they have to be within 20 miles of an office. I just really limited my talent pool. And so that's going to limit how competitive I can really be in that space. You have to have these foundational things like trust and connectivity and, working through some of these types of kind of embracing change, that kind of thing. It really does make a difference on how impactful your company can be if you accept and follow these policies and work on them over time. It will give you a significant advantage over some of your competitors if you kind of get through that and hire the best people for the job, and you don't have to constantly looking over their shoulder. So we've seen it work, but it takes time to develop, and you got to nurture this thing.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's also hiring and arming the managers too, right?
Yeah,
because
of
you
course.
need the right type of people to work in that environment and use the tools appropriately, because the same tools I use to make sure you're working could also be used to just be an overly micromanaged type person that maybe is not being supportive of what we need to achieve.
When you think about culture and you think about establishing values, we have our 8 key business concepts, all the different pieces of the curriculum. So many people can say, yeah, I understand that. They see it on a piece of paper. They see it on a poster. I know what trust is. I know what humility is. I know what embrace change is. But when you actually, especially as a leader, but even, for us, all employees is something that we want to instill in all of them, you have to be really good at applying it. And that takes practice. And so culture is not built overnight. It is something that you have to absolutely invest time in over and over and over again. And so, as leaders, I think that that's the one thing even in the COVID world, it came even more evident is how often are you checking in with your team members? How often are you ensuring that, they're doing okay? And so sometimes it's always kind of putting aside the day-to-day job, the roles and responsibilities that you have to do, and doing them at a later time, because you need to invest that time in knowing who your people are, what makes them tick, and ensuring that you have that relationship, that trust. Once you have that trust established, kind of as Joe's talked about, every other bit of it in terms of communication, collaboration, difficult conversations, all that stuff becomes not easy, but a little bit easier, because you can essentially begin to kind of, have this two-dimensional or two-way street of working through, whether it's challenges, opportunities, whatever it is, especially AI or technology changes, you're able to do that more effectively because of that foundation that you've established. But it absolutely takes time, and you cannot assume overnight that you're going to have it.
So there's a structural element that I like to do in these shows, and it's because I like that there's always action steps found within each priority of these research reports. It's a consistent kind of thing on the format that I really like, and I'd like to use this. There's 5 of them for this particular one around culture. It's start at the top, which we talked about all these already, but we're going to go a little deeper. Start at the top, and then number 2 is kind of baseline or assess the company culture so you kind of know where you're starting at. 3 is develop a cultural improvement roadmap. Then measure and report, and then collaborate. These steps are somewhat in an order, I feel like, that makes a lot of sense. We talked about start at the top, but Joe, in step 1, how do we make this real? What do you recommend when you're kind of connecting executives to the value? And because I imagine they push back and they go, well, what do I work on? What do I do first? These all sound good. We believe in them. How do you and your teams kind of help executive make that connection?
And it is interesting. I mean, you're talking to the tech team, and we end up getting ourselves into conversations now with HR leaders talking about culture and how all this stuff comes together. I think one of the best stories I've seen is we had a pretty large global bank come to us and say, how do you guys get on the greatest place to work? That matters to us. We need it for recruiting. We think we need to get better at employee experiences. How do you do that? And so what we did is we actually had our head of HR come talk to them, and we talked about exactly what we've been saying. It's if the senior leadership doesn't buy off on this, if all it is the poster on the wall or the flyer on, floating around, or it's on the back of a t-shirt, if the top doesn't buy off and agree and but believe in it, push it down, make it a priority, it's gonna fail. It really has to start with them believing in it. Probably a lot of it is kind of the documentation of what it means, why it matters, and pushing it down throughout the ranks of the leadership teams to ensure that they understand the value of these types of initiatives, why it's important to them, and keep reiterating. It's not one of those things that you practice once a year for a month, you check it off of your to-do list with your security certs and say, I'm good. It takes practice like anything else, like lifting weights, right? You got to keep doing it to stay in shape for this type of thing. And that's how it starts getting throughout your entire organization. If you look at our growth, right? When I got here, we're 2,500 employees. And today, we're north of 10,000. And we announced an acquisition. We're going to get a few thousand more in the next few months. That doesn't just happen without this type of rigor around keep practicing, understand it, practice it, go through the drills. And you have to do that in order to maintain it, because your next round of leaders might not be a leader today. The individual contributor is going to have to understand this stuff, but it all starts at the top, making sure that is all happening every single year.
So, Krista, I feel like acquisitions, especially when you talk about, let's say, a 10,000 person company acquiring something like another 1,000 people coming in. We've talked about this ad nauseum for the challenges that presents technologically speaking. What does it mean for culture? And where does it start? How do you plan for that? And how do you keep it from disrupting? Because I assume, hopefully, you know what their culture is, maybe, and that's a factor.
Yeah, I think, obviously right now, I think this is going to be the first opportunity for Worldwide to go through a very large acquisition. We've had some small little ones come into play, but this will really be our first, dip in the sand, if you will, or dip in the water, to really kind of, test how we are able to kind of integrate with one another. They are a great place to work. The executive team was very intentional to ensure that they did and currently do have a very strong culture. That is super important to us. It's not just about the business success, but really is who they are as an organization from a culture standpoint. So, that was really part of the due diligence to ensure that it would be, a really good partnership, bringing them on into the Worldwide family. And so we have to be very intentional about the way we go about integrating the two companies together. And I think assessing kind of our culture and the terminology that we use and at Worldwide, when we think about our IML, the integrated management and leadership curriculum, we call it our common language. And so we don't like to necessarily change the language that we have because we want everyone to understand exactly what we're talking about. So for instance, when we talk about, coaching situations, listening to understand, everyone knows what listening to understand is. I think what we need to do is really assess kind of how they're viewing culture and what their concepts and curriculums and initiatives look like, and how does that correlate within our own culture. And then we need to work together as a true, partnership. I'm going to call it family. I mean, that is who Worldwide is. It's about family, and really ensuring that we can come together and blend those two things in a way that can help move us all forward in a successful way. Because we don't want to lose, the foundation that we've established. But I think we also have to find a way, just as we do as a global organization. As an organization, we have our own company culture, but as you embark in new countries, there are country cultures that we have to consider. And so it's super important that we find ways to blend and to come together. So this will be a lot of that same effort. It's just done, between companies instead of a
Yeah.
company in a country.
One thing I like that you said there is you said that it's part of your assessment in the acquisition phase. Um, but which begs the question, and it's part of step 2, which is around assessing or baselining a culture so you can kind of measure the change so that because I would assume it's a lagging indicator. Pretty much everything you do is going to be somewhat more delayed than, say, an accounting statement that can track revenues and expenses and things like this. But when it comes to assessing their culture, just sticking with you for a moment, Krista, how do you look at another company's culture or even your own? What's important to look at? Maybe are there some red herrings to be aware of to stay away from because it could be seductive but not helpful?
Yes, I think the one thing as we're talking about the way to to assess culture is to remember that it can become subjective, right? It is a bit sticky, and so data tells us so much. And I think utilizing surveys and the things that we have, so Great Place to Work is a great opportunity for us to assess our culture. We do leadership surveys. I think that's what we're embarking on with this acquisition is kind of what level of baseline kind of survey results do they have. The other component, though, that's super critical and not just looking at data scores is kind of that sentiment side, is that opportunities where we can actually hear directly from employees, whether that's coming through comments, maybe within those surveys, but also at Worldwide, what we do is listening sessions. Our executive team every week sets time aside to meet with anyone in the organization. They typically right now have specific topics, but where the employees can just share what's on their minds, whether good, bad, or indifferent,
Yeah.
and our executives listen. And they start to kind of just document, like, what's people's sentiment? What's the tone? What's the intent? Is there something that we need to address? We need to consider. And then the following Monday, our executive team every Monday morning meets from 7 to 9 a.m. and they go over those things. What was discussed in the listening sessions from the prior week? And that's kind of then where kind of our executive of global HR will come to our team and say, these are some things that, that we've been hearing in these sessions. And so we need to consider, how do we improve? Sometimes it's, we need to focus in on, coaching our middle managers. We don't feel that we're supported by middle managers. We need to build better trust. We need better means for development for internal mobility. Whatever it is, it's really important to not just focus on the means of either data or or the comments. You have to be able to address them both, and then take action. It kind of to that next point that you had kind of said, that roadmap, and then executing on that roadmap.
Joe, I'm curious about, because you're probably the more technical person of all of us here on the call in terms of background, and you've been exposed to so many different technologies. And as you're speaking to customers, I'm curious, is there specific frameworks or tools that you're lighting customers up with or suggesting that they either use differently, maybe they already have, or things that they should be looking at?
Kind of all of the above.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got survey tools that have been out for quite some time. The challenge you have with surveys is, did you ask the question the right way?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
a
I'm
whole
always
science and
suspicious.
art form to asking questions on a survey. And you also have to wonder, how honest is the survey results? And sometimes if you're even like multiple choice survey results, they're kind of biased in a direction. We have found there are newer tools out there. There's a company we started working with about a year and a half ago. The company's called Aware. They've been acquired by a company called, I think it's called Mimecast now. And basically they start off by putting AI within like Teams and Slack channels, and they can read employee sentiment. And so think of it, if you do a corporate updates, you can get in real time based off of actual conversations, what's the sentiment of the employee base. Now imagine taking that same technology and put it on Glassdoor or Reddit channels. So there's now all these AI tools that can start looking at where people are talking and understand the sentiment about what those people are saying. And I think in today's age, where everyone is used to posting whatever they think and feel every 10 minutes online, there's a lot of that type of data out. That times you have to understand if people are posting, it's probably for the negative and not necessarily the positive. So you have to take out the grain of
Does
salt.
drive higher engagement. Yeah.
It does. And there are sites like Glassdoor and some of those other ones that are for that purpose.
Yeah.
But there's newer ways to track that sentiment without just saying, I'm going to go survey. Now, Krista mentioned a great one around just listening sessions. I think web conferencing and video calls have done a great job of allowing leaders to get in front of large audiences, especially remote audiences, in a more timely manner versus before it used to be, hey, I'll talk to you when you come in for your town hall once a year. And now it's, hey, I could jump on a call next Monday with Singapore, London, and San Francisco and set that up within 30 minutes. So it allows more direct interaction with all these people, and it also allows more timely information. As on top of that, and I think Krista mentioned this is a really good thing. It's one thing to listen, it's also one thing to kind of say, hey, here's how we're changing, or here's improvements, and just that interactive feedback versus if I send you a survey once a year and you don't ever hear back from me, you're not going to have a whole lot of trust that I'm going to do something on it. But if I'm showing up to these calls or putting out email communications or LinkedIn posts that says, hey, we heard what you said, here's what we're going to do. You might not like the answer of what we're going to do, but we're still addressing what the problem was. That stuff does make a difference. And I know, as we look at the priority reports, part of that is being transparent and as well, putting some of that data back out there and saying, okay, we've heard the feedback. You can address that stuff quicker in real time now to kind of help get in front of it versus if you just put it to the side, never address it, that's really how you're going to get the disengaged employees.
Well, it reminds me too of having an organization that's vulnerable and able to receive that in a proactive manner, because I think our first reaction quite often is to be defensive, and I don't want feedback that doesn't align with my beliefs of myself or my management style, perhaps.
That's also what helps to build a strong culture, is if you're willing to address the things that aren't going so well or need improvement in addressing that, and be willing to say, hey, we didn't get it right. And you know what? One, we're sorry. And two, this is what we're going to do to make it right. If we're always only allowing our, executive leaders to talk about the greatness or the success of the organization, people will become disengaged and dissatisfied with being here. And so I think that that's the one great thing about Worldwide, is that we face those things head on. We know we're not perfect. We will always strive for perfection, but understand that we're going to make missteps along the way. And we have to be willing to address that head on. And I think that that's the one great thing, like these listening sessions that we've done, the town halls that we do, is it is that follow-up. It is that, hey, we have heard you. These are the things that we're going to do. But then also to ensure you're still checking in to say, how's it going now? With that change, is that better? Is that improved? And we cannot forget about that, because it's one thing to just make a change and hopefully, see that people are, satisfied and don't say anything anymore. But it's the next thing that you continuously look at and, are we improving? Have we satisfied your needs? And to keep checking in on that. If we just make a change and never look back, that's also not going to help build a strong sense of culture.
Step 3 on the action steps is around developing a cultural improvement roadmap. And one thing that jumps out at me, both with what we're saying and with this step, is the notion of what timeframes to be thinking in. Because you mentioned a weekly listening session, and then it obviously sounds like people have it in their, every manager's probably got elements of this in their goal structure, that they have to hit certain points and achieve certain levels. But how do you, when you're doing surveys and you've got new tools and stuff over time, how do you look at historical data and accurately compare change? Because you start changing the questions too often. You almost have to limit it like a software release, in terms of, because you notice, I feel like the best way for me to figure out I've done something wrong is to release it in the wild. And instantly not only do I see it, of course, everybody else points it out, but I feel like you want to improve that, but at the same time, you have to be consistent. So you got to be very pragmatic and specific.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can look at a number of different factors. You can look at, an employee net promoter score, right? Like, how do you rank every 6 months? That's sort of an easier one.
Yeah.
But then you start looking at things like turnover rates, new hire onboarding. I think some of this too, it's as we start looking at some of the technology in here as well, it's like, hey, okay, if one of our charters around, especially around employee experiences, like to give them world-class experiences, how are we doing at that? Do we
Yeah.
have downtimes? Have we reduced the number of downtimes? Have we reduced the number of incidents? That eventually will result in a better employee experience. And if part of the charter is, hey, to have this great culture, I have to make sure that my employees are happy, engaged, and they've got the right tools, and they can get their jobs done. There's all different things you can start looking at as HR partners with IT, that they can start tracking some of these things more in real time that are a bit more tangible to track, that could prove out, okay, hey, we hit this threshold this month. Why don't we try to get to this limit next month? What are the two things we can do to change to get to that threshold now?
Yeah.
And so a lot of that is sitting down, getting the partnership in place. I think, Krista could talk about how her role has sort of probably developed over the past year, right? And we're seeing many more large organizations building out employee experience style roles that are that relationship between HR and IT, because this stuff matters a lot now. And we're also seeing titles like the Digital Employee Experience Officer. This title is coming up more because that has to matter more. And it's not just HR that has to care about it. It's not just IT. It's the blending of these things. And then it's putting the metrics in place. Say, are we ensuring that we're all doing this together? And how do we measure that?
Yeah, I think though there's still an essence of, ensuring that what we're measuring are the right things to measure. And so that consistency of some of those same statements or questions that you're asking are really important to ensure that you don't continuously change those all the time. Same thing as the way we look at our culture and our curriculum, our concepts that kind of we've embraced. We don't look to change those. It is not about the flavor of the month when it comes to culture and leadership.
Yeah.
It is truly, a homegrown curriculum that we say is that it needs to stand the test of time, and it is our common language. It is our sheet of music that we all can play off of. And if you're constantly changing that, I think that that's where it can impact your ability to have that strong culture.
Yeah.
I think that we have to, though, be adaptable in the ever-changing world. I mean, think about the tech industry that we're in. It's changing on a daily, if not by minute by second instance. But I think that what we've seen in terms of being able to be successful as an organization is that our culture stays constant as we look to kind of assess and analyze whether we're winning or losing in that culture. Like some of those ways that we do it need to be consistent, because that historical data does help us know if we are improving. Because sometimes the things that we do from culture initiatives or ways to improve our culture don't always have a particular metric in place that you can say, absolutely, this initiative increases this. I think there's some of it that can, yes, but there's so much that is an indirect correlation. So Joe, you talked about like productivity, time to execute, cost per line, cost per order, things of those natures, attrition, the turnover, those things, promotions, internal mobility, all of those things come into play. And I think that we have to remember that we don't always have one tangible metric that tells us if our initiative is right or wrong. It's looking across the gamut. And that is why it's important to partner with IT, why it's important to partner with the business to understand what metrics are important to them and how what we're trying to do, really kind of connects and blends in what they're trying to do. So it's a shared metric, if you will.
It always feels like customers or even myself, I'm reaching for a, what's the right term? That golden nugget, that one thing. I do this, or I buy this, or I employ this service, and then I get this result that I can measure. And I think it's a good reminder that all these wonderful things, one, they're going to be a little bit of a delayed metric, but also they're not going to be direct one-to-one with your accounting specifics. There's not a generally accepted digital workspace. What is it? Generally accepted accounting principles. I was trying to think of an equivalent we might have in the workspace. It's not going to work that way. Well, step number 4 is measure and report. What are the expectations for you in terms of how people are reporting to you and the areas of this that you're responsible for? And what does it mean for you to report up?
We need metrics. We need data that does help guide us in making decisions. I think that the one misconception, and even from our executive team, as we kind of come to the table to reflect some metrics, is what is the desired outcome that we're looking as we analyze the metric. And so it's one thing to pull a bunch of data together, but really what is the story that it's telling us to help us achieve a particular outcome? And so, as we go into our executive team to show them how our different culture initiatives are coming into play, I think that we have to really kind of, one, provide some sense of a baseline, the reason behind why we're doing the initiative or why we need to do the initiative. Sometimes it's, everything that we do from a worldwide perspective on the culture side is 100% presented to our executive team, and we get their buy-in to do that. So you kind of have to tell the story, paint the picture of what is going on and why there's that need to move into a particular program or initiative effort. But I think that in order for us to really kind of hone in on, things like ROI, is we need to understand, the cost impacts. What are we looking to do? What is that going to do to actually the impact to actually roll that program out? So is ensuring that we can be very transparent around the costs of what it's going to take to do. But I think then it's really trying to establish the metrics that you're trying to improve upon. And I think all the things that we just talked about, but it's ensuring that they're aligned with what we're trying to track, and ensuring that we're all on the same page and agree that those are the things that we should be doing and moving towards. So for us, it's ensuring that we can tell the story appropriately, but not just to put data in front of them, We really want it to paint the picture of
what does it mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Step 5 is around fostering collaboration. Joe, I know collaboration is a very broad term. We've got backgrounds in collaboration and such, but specifically in this, when it comes to culture, are we just talking about improving collaboration between HR and IT perhaps, or what's the right way to think about collaboration?
We're seeing the collaboration with HR, IT, the line of business, the senior level. Like, this isn't one person's job in the organization to get this done. It does take multiple people who are bought off, moving in the same direction to get things not just accomplished, but really kind of throughout the organization, get them to actually work in unison, because everyone's have their own harder to make this thing happen, right? IT has to make sure that this stuff works. HR has to ensure that there's a sort of that North Star that they're trying to get to. The line of business is going to have different requirements based off who they're hiring, what they're trying to accomplish, and so forth. At the senior level, they have to ensure that the whole organization works as a whole, and it kind of is that top-down approach. So collaboration is key. I mentioned at the beginning, trust and transparency is just so important as you look at these things. That's the only way you're going to move along. And something else that keeps coming up, and it's part of our core values, but I know when we talk to clients, especially right now with the AI boom taking place and about to happen for a lot of larger organizations, embracing change. Mm-hmm. We can't stress that enough. If your organization can't embrace that and move along, it's going to be really hard to compete over the next few years, because this stuff is changing fast. Everyone's going to get disrupted at some point within their journey as an organization. You've got to have a culture that can embrace change and move quickly, or at least move. Moving quickly is a relative term, but you have to be able to move with this, because every company is a tech company these days, and the technology changes day to day at this point. And you've got to have a culture that can adjust and move fast. Otherwise, you're going to be left in the dust.
No, well said. It's hard for me to realize change is going on when my head is so far deep in the sand and comfortable quite often in my own ignorance. But Krista, so as a final, just general question, any final thoughts, things I should have asked you that I shouldn't, things that I could have asked you but didn't, or anything else you just wanted to share to leave us with here?
Yeah, I think really for us, it's been pivotal to really kind of sit back and ensure that as we look to grow over the next 5-10 years, we think about the acquisition and we're growing and achieving, 5,000 more people, 10,000 more people, 20,000 more people. I think for us, it's been really important to take a step back and ensure that the decisions and the strategic plan that we're putting together, the North Star. Joe, it's so funny that you say that, because that's exactly what Bob Farrell says to us about our goals and our strategic plan. It's our North Star for our organization. And really for us, it's really have been taking the time to look at that in more of a proactive manner, and trying to begin to strategically plan where we need to be, as best we can, but ever changing. To your point, Joe, is we have to be able to be, nimble and flexible, because this stuff is ever changing. This has really brought us a great opportunity to assess our existing systems and our existing tools, and identify where things are going really well, and identifying things where we do have gaps. And I think really for the first time in years, I think our own internal IT and the HR organization are having great, open, collaborative, conversations around how can we achieve where we need to be in the next, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so it's really been for us very eye-opening and humbling, if you will, to ensure that we need to make better decisions to ensure that our employees have an exceptional experience. My team's ultimate goal is that every single employee retires here. And so how do we do that? And how do we leverage the technology? I think that there's so much out there that can really aid us as an organization from a technology perspective, that we just, I think, have grown so much and so quickly that sometimes we get more in a reactive mode than a proactive mode. And that's what we really need to shift to. And so I think that the team is more excited than ever to lean into where the technology can aid us and help us, ensure that we give that exceptional employee experience and continue to be a great place to work for all. So for us, it's just been a great learning process over the course of the last 9 months. And I think that, I think we'll continue to be doing that. I think we're going to be working very closely with Joe and his team and the rest of our internal IT stakeholders, because I think there's a lot that we can do to even enhance our own organization in this topic.
One example of the transparency and the trust that you guys exhibit is the fact that you're on this call talking, to customers about internal operations within Worldwide. Joe, it's obvious you're always talking to customers, but it just further ratifies the fact that I think you guys are pulling this off, and organizations would do well to ask you, how are you doing this? And you guys have developed programs around this. I am excited about how well AI is suited to assist in these areas. And I think that's an exciting area, and safely doing that and saying, how do we leverage this beast that we've created? It's a fun place to be. And I think this is one of the areas that's going to be dramatically affected as well. So I'm glad you guys are on top of it, because I'm learning from you as we go along.
Stay tuned. A lot of content being developed on that talk track as we speak.
Yeah.
Well,
AI will be the next intern you hire. So we're actively talking about what does that mean, and how do you train it, and how do you upskill your workforce to start taking advantage of this. The saying that we keep using around here, AI is not going to replace your job, but somebody using AI will.
Right.
So
absolutely.
It's coming fast.
Yeah. Glad you guys are leading it. Well, Joe, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having us, Rob.
Absolutely. Krista, thank you as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come in and do this with you all. It's been fun.
Well, we opened by asking how successful organizations like WWT turn culture from a buzzword into bottom line results. And what we've seen is striking. From AI-powered sentiment analysis to weekly executive listening sessions, the tools and technology for building exceptional cultures have evolved dramatically. But what stands out most is how WWT's 5-step framework brings it all together, starting at the top with genuine leadership commitment, measuring what matters through both data and dialogue, developing clear cultural roadmaps, and fostering true collaboration across departments. Most importantly, you've seen how this approach helped WWT navigate everything from remote work to major acquisitions while maintaining their status as a great place to work. So are you ready to put these insights into action? Download the full Digital Workspace Priorities for 2025 report for a detailed look at how culture can become your competitive advantage. With organizations seeing up to 5x revenue increases from strong cultures, this isn't just about employee satisfaction. It's about business success. I'm Rob Boyd. I want to thank you for joining us on WWT Presents Research.